Emily arrived at the Ivy Hollow Inn just as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the countryside in hues of gold and purple. The inn stood like a relic of another time, its ivy-covered facade exuding an air of grandeur and mystery. She was immediately struck by the stillness of the place. Even the chirping of crickets seemed muted, as though the inn itself demanded silence. The purpose of her trip was simple: escape the noise of the city and focus on her writing. The inn's history intrigued her. Rumors of it being haunted added a touch of excitement to her stay. The innkeeper, Mrs. Havers, greeted her with a polite but wary smile, her demeanor guarded. "Your room is on the second floor," Mrs. Havers said, handing her an ornate brass key. "If you need anything, just let me know." Emily noticed a flicker of hesitation in the woman's eyes as she turned away. She dismissed it as nothing more than small-town eccentricity and made her way upstairs. The wooden steps creaked under her weight, and the dim lighting cast long shadows that seemed to stretch and move as she ascended. At the end of the hallway, she saw the sign, "Do not enter after dark." The warning hung above a narrow staircase that spiraled upward to a locked door. The letters, painted in bold red strokes, looked freshly made, as though someone had reinforced the message recently. She couldn't help but feel a pang of curiosity. Why the restriction? Was it an old wives' tale? Or was there something genuinely sinister behind the warning? Deciding not to dwell on it, she retired to her room for the evening, though the sign lingered in her thoughts. As the night deepened, Emily tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind kept circling back to the locked door upstairs. She remembered Mrs. Havers' hesitance and how her tone had shifted when discussing the inn's peculiarities. Finally, unable to resist, Emily grabbed her flashlight and crept out of her room. The inn was deathly quiet, save for the faint creaking of the floorboards beneath her bare feet. When she reached the staircase leading to the forbidden door, her pulse quickened. The door was unlocked. The air inside the room was frigid, despite the warmth of the summer night. She shivered as she stepped in, her flashlight beam revealing what lay beyond. The walls were lined with mirrors of all shapes and sizes. Their gilded frames gleamed faintly in the moonlight, filtering through the single window. As she moved deeper into the room, she noticed how eerily pristine the mirrors were. Not a speck of dust marred their surfaces, and they reflected her image with unsettling clarity. Yet something felt off. Emily turned to leave, but as she glanced at one mirror, her reflection didn't move. Her heart thudded in her chest as she froze in place. The mirrored version of herself smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that spread across its face like a crack in porcelain. Her reflection lifted a hand, waving at her mockingly. Emily stumbled backward, colliding with another mirror. She spun around and saw a different version of herself, this one pale and gaunt, its hollow eyes staring back at her with despair. It mouthed something silently, its lips trembling. "Let me out." The words weren't spoken aloud, but Emily heard them in her mind. The room began to warp, the mirrors reflecting impossible scenes. One showed her trapped in a dark cellar, clawing at the walls. Another showed her sitting at her desk, her eyes wide and lifeless, as though she had been frozen in time. Panicked, she turned back toward the door, only to find it gone. The room seemed to stretch endlessly, the mirrors multiplying, surrounding her on all sides. "Help me!" a voice screamed. It came from her, but she hadn't opened her mouth. Then the hands came. They emerged from the mirrors, pale, skeletal, and cold as death. They grabbed at her arms, her hair, her legs, pulling her toward the nearest glass. Emily fought back, screaming as she clawed at the floor, but the hands were relentless. One mirror shattered as she kicked at it, but instead of freeing her, the shards cut deep into her skin, and her blood seemed to vanish, absorbed into the broken glass. "Stay with us," a chorus of voices whispered. Her strength fading, Emily managed to grab a heavy candlestick from a nearby table and smashed it into the largest mirror. It cracked, but didn't break. the reflection inside twisting into an expression of rage. Suddenly, the hands released her, and she fell to the floor, gasping for air. The mirrors went silent, and the room returned to its cold, eerie stillness. Emily fled the room, her legs trembling as she stumbled back to her car. She didn't even bother grabbing her belongings. As she sped down the dark country road, her thoughts raced, replaying the horrors she had witnessed. But as the headlights illuminated the road ahead, she caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. Her reflection was smiling. The forest was unnervingly quiet as a group of 5 friends stumbled upon the clearing. What lay before them was something none of them could have anticipated: a fully intact carnival, its attractions gleaming under the faint glow of the setting sun. The colors of the tents were vibrant, the rides appeared freshly painted, and strings of lights blinked invitingly, despite the lack of electricity in the surrounding woods. "What the hell is this?" Luke muttered, stepping forward cautiously. "I thought this trail led to a lake, not this," Jenna replied, her voice tinged with unease. There was no sound of wildlife, no rustling of leaves, only an eerie silence that pressed down on them like a weight. A sign stood at the carnival's entrance. "Welcome to Harlequin Carnival, where the fun never ends." The group exchanged wary glances. "Looks abandoned," Mark said, though the perfection of the place seemed to contradict his words. "Maybe they're setting up for an event?" Casey suggested. "Out here, in the middle of nowhere?" Jenna countered. Despite their misgivings, curiosity got the better of them. They passed through the arched gate, which creaked ominously as it swung shut behind them without anyone touching it. The carnival was an unsettling contradiction. Everything appeared pristine. The Ferris wheel stood tall, its cars swaying gently in a non-existent breeze, and the carousel spun slowly, its haunting melody filling the air. But there was no staff, no patrons, no sign of human life. "Guys, this is freaky," Mia said, her voice trembling. "Let's just leave." Luke, always the boldest, grinned. "Oh, come on. How often do you get to explore something like this? It's probably some art installation or something. Let's check it out." He jogged toward a nearby attraction, a funhouse with a gaudy clown face painted over the entrance. Its mouth was open wide, forming a tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly into darkness. The others hesitated but followed reluctantly. Inside the funhouse, the air was thick and suffocating. Mirrors lined the walls, distorting their reflections into grotesque shapes. Laughter echoed faintly, though no one had laughed. "Let's just walk through and get out of here," Mia whispered, clutching Jenna's arm. But as they moved deeper, the group became separated. One by one, their calls for each other faded into silence. Luke was the first to vanish. Jenna turned a corner, only to find his flashlight lying on the floor, its beam flickering weakly. A small prize ticket lay next to it, bearing the words, "Congratulations, your first prize awaits." "Luke?" Jenna called, her voice shaking. "Where are you?" The mirrors around her began to shimmer, the distorted reflections shifting. One of the mirrors showed Luke trapped inside, pounding against the glass. His mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Before Jenna could react, the image flickered and disappeared, leaving her staring at her own horrified face. Outside, Casey and Mark wandered toward the Ferris wheel, oblivious to the others' fates. They heard faint music drifting from the direction of the carousel and turned to look. The carousel horses weren't just spinning, they were moving. The painted eyes of the animals glowed red, and the laughter emanating from the ride was no longer faint. It was booming, maniacal, and inescapable. "What the hell is happening?" Casey whispered. Mark didn't respond. He was staring at the Ferris wheel, where a figure sat in one of the cars. It was a clown, its painted grin impossibly wide. It waved at them, its gloved hand moving in slow, deliberate motions. "Run!" Mark managed to choke out. But Casey didn't move. The clown's eyes locked onto hers, and she began walking toward the Ferris wheel, as if in a trance. Mark grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but she slipped free and climbed into the nearest car. The Ferris wheel groaned to life, spinning faster and faster until it became a blur of lights. When it stopped abruptly, Casey was gone. All that remained in her seat was a stuffed animal, a grotesque caricature of her face sewn onto its body. By the time Jenna and Mark found each other again, they were the only ones left. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, his voice tight with panic. "No kidding," Jenna snapped. They ran toward the exit, but the gate was gone, replaced by an endless wall of striped tents. The path behind them twisted and shifted, leading them back to the heart of the carnival. In the center stood a massive big-top tent, its entrance flapping open invitingly. From within, they heard faint voices, voices that sounded like their friends. "They're in there," Mark said. Jenna grabbed his arm. "Number, it's a trap." But Mark shook her off and sprinted inside. Jenna hesitated, torn between following him and running in the opposite direction. Her decision was made for her when the tent flaps snapped shut, leaving her alone in the chilling silence. Inside the tent, Mark found himself surrounded by an audience of clowns, their painted faces leering at him. At the center of the ring stood a figure in a ringmaster's outfit. It was the clown from the Ferris wheel. "Ladies and gentlemen," it boomed. "The show must go on," Mark screamed as the clowns descended on him, their laughter echoing through the night. Outside, Jenna heard his cries and knew she was truly alone. She turned to run, only to find the Ferris wheel looming before her. In one of the cars, she saw her own face staring back at her. And then the laughter began again. It was a gray, somber evening when 12-year-old Danny stumbled upon the old well at the edge of the forest behind his house. The well had been hidden by overgrown vines and moss, its stones cracked and weathered by time. On the edge of the stonework, faded words were etched. "Wish with care." Danny had been wandering, lost in his grief. It had been 6 months since his mother had passed, leaving a void in his heart that nothing seemed to fill. When he found the well, something about it called to him, a quiet, haunting whisper in the back of his mind. Clutching a coin in his trembling hand, Danny closed his eyes. His voice wavered as he whispered, "I wish I could see my mom again." The coin fell, clinking against the walls as it descended into the darkness. Silence followed, broken only by the rustling of leaves. Danny waited, holding his breath. When nothing happened, he sighed and turned to leave. But then, he heard it. A soft voice, sweet and familiar, called from the woods behind him. "Danny, my boy." At first, it was everything Danny had hoped for. His mother appeared, her face as he remembered it, warm, kind, and comforting. She embraced him, her touch as real as it had ever been. Danny brought her home, and his father, though shaken, couldn't deny it was her. Even his younger sister, Lily, clung to her as though the months without her had been a bad dream. For a few days, it was bliss. The house was filled with laughter again, with the smells of Mom's cooking and the sound of her singing. But then, things began to change. It started small. Danny's mother would sit in silence for hours, staring at nothing, her eyes glassy. She would hum in a low, eerie tone, a tune none of them recognized. At night, the family heard her pacing the halls, her footsteps heavy and uneven. One morning, Danny woke to find her standing at the foot of his bed, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her smile was too wide, her teeth too sharp. "Mom," he whispered. Her voice was low and guttural. "I'm so glad you brought me back, Danny. I missed you so much." The incidents grew darker. Plants in the house withered, their leaves turning black. Lily swore she heard whispers coming from their mother when she wasn't looking, speaking words she didn't understand. The family dog refused to enter the house, whining and scratching at the door. One night, Danny's father confronted her. "You're not my wife," he said, his voice shaking. her expression twisted into something monstrous, her eyes hollow and glowing faintly. "You wanted her back," she hissed, "and here I am." That night, Danny's father packed their bags, determined to leave. But when they tried to drive away, the road seemed endless, looping them back to the house no matter which direction they went. Desperate, Danny returned to the well, clutching the coin that had started it all. He whispered his wish into the darkness again. "I don't want her like this. Please make her stop." The well's answer came in the form of a bone-chilling whisper. "A wish cannot be undone, only paid for." Danny dropped the coin and begged, "What do you want?" The whisper replied, "A sacrifice greater than the wish." Danny returned home, his heart heavy with the weight of the well's demand. His mother, or whatever she had become, was waiting for him. Her skin had turned pale and stretched, her hands clawed. She no longer resembled the woman he loved. Lily cowered behind their father, who held a kitchen knife in trembling hands. "We have to stop her," his father said. Danny thought about the well's words. "It wants something valuable," he said. His father looked at him, realization dawning. "It wants us to give up what we love most," Lily screamed as their mother lunged, her movements jerky and unnatural. Danny grabbed the knife from his father's hands and ran. "I'll fix this," he yelled, tears streaming down his face. Danny returned to the well, his mother's growls echoing in the distance. He tossed the knife into the darkness. "Take me," he cried. "Just leave my family alone." The forest grew silent. The air became thick, suffocating. The well's voice whispered again, "Accepted." From behind him, his mother shrieked, her voice splitting the night. Danny turned to see her dissolve into black smoke, her features twisting and melting. She was gone. The next morning, Danny's father and Lily woke to find the house empty. Danny's bed was neatly made, his belongings untouched. Back at the well, his coin sat on the edge, glinting in the morning light. A new etching appeared beneath the old warning. "Wishes granted. Prices paid." Danny's father swore he could still hear his son's voice calling from the forest on quiet nights.